당은 그것은 난 저기 레 균제 세디다 레 소설 지게 유행해 발레 소설해 봐서야나 내레 패셔와 근데 맞제바다 마테바 아니 제바 취미서 와서 되네기 안데 직디서 하고 같이 되네 먼저 나라 되네기 디봉 기룹제와라 디봉 세디 어저께 레미게 와디게 지금 봉고를 디봉하라다 되네기 레미게 와세디 레람 주세디 대 하고 같이 디발랑도 제야래야 도신 냠네 제고레스 다디 레람 주세디 아니 가와송열에서는 안데 상예기 도나래 상예 손바래 안데 디제라 안데 지 변룹되게 단 도시 텐션나래 송거레스 다 상예기 딜레람 주세디 송고비 김장 가르에서는 다 안주기 안주야 되네기 지게 만송을 기획이 답에 지 되네기 류가 있으면 권데 디바사바 있는 디바디원게 당한송을 기획을 봐서 지산디기 시체와래서 카나마도바 디바 첨부래서 디바 첨부래 딜레 제부 만송을 기도 동안 봐도 매번 용어를 디엔자데 도시네 레람쥐 봐 도신 송 안디 도디 송네 빵빵여디 디도초 안에 기비 자와 그래서 레람 주세야 냠네 제디래서 가서 가서 어디 쉬리다.
Good morning. So last night, we having now concluded looking at the first part of the presentation on karmic cause and effect, we saw from Lama Tsongkhapa, he said, now that you've come to have a general understanding of cause and effect, of those four general characteristics, that karma is definite. In other words, happiness comes from causes. Those causes are virtuous. All forms of suffering also come from causes, and those causes are non-virtuous. So karma is definite. Moreover, secondly, karma increases. Therefore, one should refrain from even accumulating small non-virtues and never ignore the opportunity to accumulate small virtues. And thirdly, that one does not meet the results if one has not accumulated the specific causes. So therefore, if one wants a specific result, one has to accumulate those causes. Merely wishing is insufficient. And fourthly, that causes created do not dissipate. They do not go to waste. So therefore, virtue one has accumulated will have a ripening effect. Non-virtue, though, one needs to purify. So having then come to understand the general presentation on karma, then Lama Tsongkhapa leads us now to this next section, which is, having understood this, well then, what should I do? Well, what should I do with this knowledge? What is it that I should adopt and what I should abandon? There Lama Tsongkhapa says, come to understand the specific workings of karma through the presentation on the 10 paths of karmic action. And the first part that we looked at last night presents or shows how this was taught by the Buddha himself, as well as commented by the great masters from India. So this is the presentation then on the 10 virtuous karmic paths of action and the 10 non-virtuous karmic paths of action. These are accumulated by means of the 3 doors of the body, speech, and mind. So it's imperative that one abandons or rejects the accumulation of the 10 non-virtues, because should they ripen as a propelling karmic imprint, they can but only lead to rebirth in the suffering lower realms. On the other hand, if one accumulates the 10 virtues, these are causes to attain excellent rebirths, and rebirths that will enable one to continue one's process of spiritual development.
다데니마 니와 다당한 저게 도승고 다데니게 레람주디 미게 레람주 빵마다 기베 레람주 디 냠슬링고 거데 냠슬레나데 아직 노된마 숭고레.
So now we'll continue in the text where Lama Tsongkhapa comes closer to presenting how to engage in these the 10 accumulation of the 10 virtues and abandonment of the 10 non-virtues. So now the second sub-outline here is how to greatly value this presentation.
미개위게 먼저 룽아 유숨기 미개와 주디 안에 야봉을 송하고 같이 dene mikiwe juyi ne da jige dene 제부 가르용 거라서는 안 가서다 지마 안지게 동화 만솔 마게 다 데네 동화뇨 용 거래서 데네기 안도서인 저게 다 하고 시하고 거래 디하고네 데네 나네 가서래 미개의 주기 규엔디게 통하지다 가서네 미개 주 규례 제바이나 디게 제부 마음바나 동화 용구요 바자다 규엔리 샤스 노트레 샤스베 온두신에 당보 디하고 자고 와지고 그래서
we need to come to understand the presentation on the 10 non-virtuous actions well. So we understand its various components, what constitutes an action as being a non-virtuous, and various gradients of non-virtue. And one also needs to understand the karmic results that follow from those non-virtues. Both parts are required. One needs to know the result because this spurs one's determination to avoid non-virtue, and one needs to understand clearly what constitutes a complete non-virtuous act, so that in one's avoidance or rejection of such non-virtue, one can do so completely.
So much about Zamgi, so to be Sungo Mare, so much about Zamgi, so to be Sungo Mare, and in Asian that Tsongkhapa Akia and the Nege, Masheba Zamda, Dela and the Sumbig, Surim Sungo Mare, Chisan Sungo Mare, Zada, Cargo Resene, and Benediction that Lunga used me, never Macheva Zamgi, the Lunga is never Sungo Mare, what is.
It's important to understand this topic well, because a common misunderstanding is thinking that if one merely does not engage in a particular non-virtue, one is thereby accumulating virtue. In other words, if one thinks, oh, I don't kill, so therefore I'm accumulating the virtue of ethically, or the virtue of ethically abandoning killing. This is not necessarily the case. Merely not doing something doesn't mean that one is accumulating virtue. It means you're refraining, or you're not accumulating that particular non-virtue. But it doesn't therefore mean one is accumulating the virtue. So with speech, maybe this is more clear. If one does not engage in harsh speech, then one is not accumulating the non-virtue of harsh speech, but it doesn't necessarily mean that one is accumulating the virtue of ethically abandoning harsh speech. So, for example, when one's asleep, one is not killing, one is not telling any lies, but that doesn't mean that one is accumulating the virtue of abandoning killing or accumulating the virtue of abandoning lying.
하고 제 미교 주기 제보되는 용거를 해야 돼. 다 저도 하고 왔지. 디네자다 미교와 주셔야 될 미교를 람 주셔야 될 배경이 봐. 노트에 맞될 때에다 강한 뭐 쳐야 돼. 유대를 되는 용구도 와 선배들 하고 왔지네. 데네기 알람 주대 남야 책임에 선배다. 데네기 즉 렐람 주디 싸우기는 책임에 데네기 제 속죄 봐서 싸우기는 책임에 선배. 다 지금 소주에 매집아 맞아 소주긴 세배 삼노점랑 콜주고 세배게다 데니기 파이게 다도체 담야 되다 송세다 디 맞아 디고고 제자다 베네 류 식습제다 디 류가 유스미 권에 데니기 디바디게 싸우긴 지금 매 선배 제 삼다야다 데니기 마지와 맞아 데니게 삼노코론 콜주고 세배게다 꾸노점나 제주고 매 세배 데니기 담자바 켈렘바 담자바 데네 셈래야 두스 담자바 있나 삼다와이나 다디 주름 송화 제거 송화세 제거래.
In terms of ethics, one often hears the verb to guard or to protect. One needs to guard oneself from engaging in particular unethical behavior. So this term, guarding or protecting, is of great importance. But to actually want to guard or protect oneself from engaging in ethics, there are the two prior steps of, firstly, understanding what is unethical. So in the presentation of the 10 non-virtues, understanding them well, as well as not just understanding the non-virtuous causes, but their suffering results that follow. So that understanding these two prior components of non-virtuous causes, understanding what those causes are in some detail, and their suffering results, leads to the determination, I will not do so. And this determination of, for example, I will not kill, this motivation, this intention not to kill, this is the ethical mind of guarding oneself from killing. This is how one creates the virtue of not killing. It's by having understood what is meant by killing, so understood the non-virtuous behavior, as well as its karmic results. Those two are the causes that lead to this ethical determination, I will not do so. I will not do so. And that is then the accumulating the virtue of abandoning killing. This then is ethical restraint.
Andi jigme seme denige samdaya da dene ane di doksholia lunga yusum yukune gewi jawa nyamne de 강투도 jigin sembege da dusin samdaya de juge da nyamlen je de diche hore sungorda.
And so one, through coming to understand non-virtuous causes and their suffering results, one gives rise to the mind of ethical restraint of, I will not do so. This firm intention. And then one will also want to engage in the opposite of those non-virtues. And in this way, one creates excellent merit.
Jisadam sajube donal ba duschene sam dus nyamlen chita de du sam den chik jeore saji dus jewe na de ane janga juge lunga yusum yokone da jige kosum yokone lunga yusum yokone da jini ke nyeje jawa migiwe lelam juk dune jigme sembe sam daada dine sam daada ane dine gi dojo gewe ju nyamlen yang jigin sembe sam da du suwe na di dang zo 지고 개와 치망 원료 고방 토야 라속바다 델라딘의 토고레스 아니 네네 아니 디가 주길래 람냠소 리엔제 탈바다 탐지 초람게 졸람게라디네 통랑 고만스게 된 탈바다 탐지 김고 고방 토야 되래 당보 지절 마선 네네게 삼다지 디딜레 되냐 주님 어두신 람냠네 탈바 탐지 고방 토고레스 이제 어디네 자디 빼면서 계신보래 디냠네 제 samdāni pē gēchīn bōrē sēn sāchūpē duanā bādū sōng yō rē sē wā dā dēchī rē sāchūpē duanē sē dē jīsā sāchū duanā sōng yō sē dōr dūshī mādū mīnduwa dē nā.
Now turning to the text.
sāchūpē duanā gāsā mīgē wā chūpōng kē tsūchīm lā ngā bā sē nē mīgē chūpōng tsūchīm bē dī gēchīn bōrē dī yāk bōrē dī jē wā rē sē dē dū sōng yō rē sē ngā bā sē dē. 미게 주봉의 추림라 나빠 세대 담보 대 되세도 제일 마셔야 돼 담보디 지사대 사주베도 나라 되지 미고 주봉의 추림지 빼 예천벌에 송국을 대송바이나 개와치면 원료 고방 델라딘의 토고 되는 토고 탈바다 탐지기 몇 고방 델라딘 토고 되는 빼 예천벌이 야보래서는 주 송열에서 사주베도 추림라 나빠 세대.
So turning to the text, near the bottom of page 122. Therefore, the object praised in the 10 Grounds Sutra is the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues. Lama Tsongkhapa then refers directly to the teaching of the Buddha, to a particular sutra. And it's in this sutra that the Buddha praises the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues. And why is this? Because through abandoning the 10 non-virtues, one is stopping accumulating causes that will lead to undesired results, and will be rather focusing one's energy on accumulating the causes that lead to desired results. So all of us want happiness. We want to abide in a state freed of suffering. And having meditated well on the sufferings of the lower realms, we develop a determination, I must avoid those accumulating those causes that will lead to such a result, but rather accumulate the causes that lead to a rebirth in the higher realms. Moreover, I want to attain a state of lasting happiness, a state that is a happiness that is definite. In other words, it won't be lost. This is the state of liberation or enlightenment. This too requires specific causes, and those causes are accumulated in dependence on the very foundation, which is the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues. And it is for this reason that the Buddha praised this training so.
Onda denege sejubi dona dus ngapare si sonyorese yakore sonyorese. Tadi sonyoge donda de sejubi dona lo sonshibi donda de da benen dawada be umajuba nala do songorese. Den ngabe donda de da sejubi dona lo sonshegi jorba di donda de den umajuba lejang umajuba le kar sonyorese soso gewo namda songieda ranjang chubla dani nge namda yese namgi ngeber lebadang Mondo yune tsudumleshe me che dune sonsos.
Just can change the translation a little bit here. Doesn't really change the meaning of the verse, but nevertheless. So therefore the object, that word object, we can change to meaning because it's the same word. So therefore the meaning of what is praised in the sutra is the ethical discipline of abandoning the 10 non-virtues. Now that meaning then is Lama Tsongkhapa brings out through a further quotation. This is summarized in Entering the Middle Way, so Chandrakirti's text. For the definite goodness and higher states of ordinary beings, those born from his speech, those established for self-enlightenment, and the victor's children, the cause is none other than ethical conduct.
Andade soso kewa namna sedi da ngaran juge lamla mashubi ngaran soso kibo siwur da lamla mashubi soso kibo dige da jizang ngan juge lunga yisu nyeje tumbe churimsung dene di dojo ane ji gewege mige ju kewa kasa kewa mi lunga yisu kewa ju nyamlen jeba ina jeba la dene ane kewa chima 원조 고파되게 도고거디 도고지 유텔할 때는 원조 고파 도고래 해서 그럴 때 무슨 기와 남나세야 돼. 당 원조 균이 원조 유세야 돼. 타마도와 지나디 강려야 자야 돼. 그래서 내게 소소기 와서 람람마슈바 되게 네 맞아. 개와 침봉 원조 고파 토야 돼. 그래서 도고래라나 당 안주기 원조 고파 토야 돼. 류가 예수님 예저든 수rim송 디도저 안에 류가 예수님 개와도서 냠는 제바되나 텔할 때네 개와치만 원도 소소 람람마슈바 맞아 되게 개와치만 원도 고바데 데니스 주고 그래 델레테는 톱투고 그래 딩냠는 제고 그래 세스고
The order of the English and the Tibetan is very mixed, so we're going to bounce around a little bit in the verse. So the Tibetan starts with ordinary beings. So here, ordinary beings refers to those who have not accumulated a mental path. So ordinary beings, they have to train in abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions. So train in the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtuous actions so that they at least close the door to low realm rebirth in their next life. Moreover, in addition to engaging in the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, they need to accumulate or train in the 10 virtuous actions. So they're opposites. By doing that, ordinary beings achieve two results. One, they close the door to rebirth in the lower realms in the next life, and they accumulate the causes that lead to what we have in the first line, higher states. So rebirth as a human or God. So this is an indispensable, a foundational training for beings, for ordinary beings.
Sungye dan sedi da sungye sedi nyandue di so nyandue ge lam nyandue ge lam nyamne cholan da cholam angkon lam dine do se nyandue ta chumbi te bo to de nyandue sungye se sung sedi Dömba Sangyu Jumden Digi, Dianjing Zhewa Juwe, Namsha, Dende Yangla Junye, Ma Song Je, Di Song Di, and the Sangyu Songbu Jelia, and Tuesam Gomsum Yamlen Jeje, and Ya and Chuan Yandu Cholam, Jolam, Tonlam, and Gomlam Jeje, and the judgment Toba Desi or Song Gie said. The nigger song said Sangyu Jumden Digi, Dende Yala Junye Song, Gie said the day. Turn the Yamso Lembala, Gene Rangula, and Yandu Cholam, Jolan, Yokolan, Yotolam, the Nigi Milobe Lam, the Niki getting at the Yesor. This way, Geva the young Lam Yamlin, Chabala, Dambo Shizadi, Lunga using Yujim Sudum Sungu, yes, Sudma Sombana, Din Yamneti Yongsukumara, Chesa Dinenza, the Nigi, Yandu Sungi, Yandu, Yamlen, Yandu Judge, Yandu Judgment, Tobalam. Dambo and Lunga using Yajim Surim Sung, the Dojo, and Lunga using Gazmigi Gawaju Juviadi, Yachimbo Della Dine, Della Dine, then the judgment toward Della Mademba, then Yamna Dambo Shisa, then Lunga's Yajim Surumasomba, then judgment to two Marias.
First line concludes with, so we looked at of ordinary beings and then those born from his speech. So ordinary beings refer to any being who has not attained a path. Those born from his speech refer to those who have attained a hearer path. Hearers are those who engage in extensive hearing, so hearing the teachings of the Buddha, cultivating the teachings of the Buddha, but striving for their own individual liberation. So those born from his speech, so this word born, it can also be translated as arise from his speech. So the hearer arises from the speech of the Buddha, and they will have attained either the hearer path of accumulation or preparation or seeing or meditation. So such a practitioner will have attained one of these hearer paths or any of these hearer paths in dependence on the same foundation. The foundation of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the accumulation of the 10 virtues. It is only in dependence on developing this powerful foundation that one can attain the hearer's paths.
Ene ranjan chupsedi rangye dige sior. Chesada rangye dige rangye cholam ge jolam thola komla rangye jachime jibu tobala 당포 안에 류가 있으니 주디베 추림 맞아 추림이 시조 신 디데네다 냠네 제발에 되네 라예 초라조라 komla 데 라예 저지미 되고 토고 제사다 라예 저지미 되고 토와야야 아니 녀바도 당포 안에 류가 있으니 주디베 추림 송야 네 안에 류가 있음기 안에 개와디 주야 되게 라리고레서 송거 데라 마템바 데네 라게 람규레 게데 라예 저지미 되고 토토와 요 말에서 그래.
Then in English, we go to the third line, those established for self-enlightenment. So self-enlightenment here refers to solitary realizers. So we've looked at ordinary beings, then we looked at hearers, and now solitary realizers. So solitary realizers, these are practitioners who are also striving for their own individual liberation or enlightenment. Liberation and enlightenment can mean the same thing, but their own individual liberation or enlightenment. And so this is the meaning of self-enlightenment, for themselves alone, their own enlightenment or their own liberation. So again here, in this context, enlightenment and liberation does not mean Buddhahood, but individual liberation. So solitary realizers, those who have attained the paths of the solitary realizers, paths of accumulation, preparation, and so forth, any one of those, can only do so in dependence on the foundational training of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the 10 virtues. So they too could only attain and then continue to progress along their paths in dependence on the same foundational training.
다니 nye namda ne 다니 namda 치 랑자 줄라 다니 nye nam다스 게세 다 랑자 줄라 다니 nye 남세다 랑게 다 준비 지체 되네 게세 세데다 전주 셈바 다 초랑 조랑 통랑 공람 톱제데 산지고 봐 토발라양 네네 되네기 안에 당보 냠네 룽의 순위주도 수림 시송 조 시송 디데네 아는 저 잠니제 장주쌤 귤라게 되는 장주쌤의 초랑초랑 건 냠는제 타르 안에 산지고바 토바 델라양 자와 당보 아니 룽의 순위주도 수림 송아지고 그래 되네게 수림 마송바 아니 되네게 람냠는제 산지고바 토토야요 말이에서 그러다.
Then we go to the very bottom of the verse, and the victor's children. So the victor's children refers to bodhisattvas. So bodhisattvas here are those who have generated uncontrived bodhicitta and their continuum, and thereby have attained the bodhisattva path of accumulation or progress beyond to the bodhisattva path of preparation, seeing, or meditation. Bodhisattvas, just like solitary realizers that we just looked at, or hearers, or ordinary beings, the very foundation of their training is that of the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the accumulation of the 10 virtues. Without this foundation, a practitioner cannot generate bodhicitta. So therefore, the paths of the victor's children, or the paths of the bodhisattva, remain closed to anyone who does not abandon or does not engage in the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engage in the accumulation of the 10 virtues.
당보 안에 수림기 안에 수림염소 렌지와 링아스 뉴지도 수림이 시송에 되네 돈마도 수림염소 말렘바 안에 데라마템바 안에 랑게다 년여다 랑게다 전시선바디게 녜레 톱투야요 말레스 이 맛에 안에 나 람라마시비 소소기보디게 개와치면 온디오고 말 하다 미고 봐 토바디야 당보 수림기 냠소 렘발레 때네 토고르마도 수중에서 말렘바 토토야요 말레스 되는 온디기는 수림 레제메스 랑 게세 남기 녜레 다슨 랑야다 년여다 랑야 전시선바 남기 녜레 탈바 탐지기 보고 봐 토발라야 근데 수림 냠슬렘바에 저 시대를 때네 토보고래 소소기보 남기 람라마주베 소소남 기원은 원디오 고바 토바야 난 링아스 니주도 수림소의 시대를 때 토고래 제가 수림 레셈에 수림라 마덴바 안 수림 링아스 니주도 수림라 마덴바 되네기 원디오 고바 토야요 말에 달바다 템지기 보고 토도야요 말에서 인지민디다 수림 냠슬렘 고고래에서 숨어.
And the verse concludes with, the cause is none other than ethical conduct. So what Janakirti has presented in this verse is that for ordinary beings who have come to an understanding of the Dharma and recognize that due to the afflictions in their mind and the resulting non-virtuous behavior, there is a real possibility of falling into the lower realms in the next rebirth. Therefore, they have to ensure they close the door to such possibility and rather attain, as we see in the first line, rebirth in higher states. And the cause for that is none other than ethical conduct. Without abandoning the 10 non-virtues, that ordinary being is in grave danger of falling into the suffering of the lower realms in the next rebirth. And for those who aspire to attain the paths of a hero or a solitary realizer, they have as their goal the definite goodness of individual liberation, or those who aspire to the paths of the bodhisattvas, who have as their goal the definite goodness of Buddhahood. For them too, without developing an excellent foundation of ethical conduct, where they restrain their mind within the confines of what is ethical, they too will not be able to cultivate the initial path of a hero or solitary realizer or bodhisattva, let alone progress along paths. So therefore, the very basis for the attainment of every spiritual goal one has is ethical restraint. It is the indispensable foundation.
안데나야 추림례 셴메 추림례 아니 샹다 요 말에 세지 송도와 지산데 추림례 셴메 세디 도나 가르송어스네 수림을 마도 샨다 개와디게 원료 고방 투비 유 샨다 요 말에 안에 달바 틈지 김에 고방 샨다 요 말에서는 송고 말이시래. 근데 진비 냠는 쇠비 냠는 냠는 제발 때는 달바도 틈지 김에 고방 투 규체적으로 와 개와지만 원료 고방 투발에 단주기 밀리를 메시도 받아야 아주 진바다 쇠바다 냠는 제고로 와 재상 원료 고방 되라 수림을 샨다 원료 고방 유요 말에서는 레고 말에서 다데 수림레 셴 마인시 메세데 가르소는 수림라 마덴바 수림 녀소 말렘바 안에 샹가네스 녜스 렘바이나 원료고 봐 톱투고 말에 타바답지 보고 봐 톱투고 말에 수림라 마덴바 안에 수림라 마덴바지 개와신 냠소 레네 냠소 타바답지 고 톱투고레베 개와시만 원료고 봐 톱투고레세네 데네 수림 마송와 안데네게 냠네 가소레 데네 톱투야가 요 말에 에셀 고고레제마도 수림레셴 수림마도 샤다디게 능원료고 봐 원고도 규체가 말에 유요 말에 그 말에 안에 타바든지 기묘고 봐도 그 말에서 레고 말에서 셴메세 돈다에 가르고 오스네 수줌라 마덴바 셴 가네스 냠술렘바이나 원료고 보토비오다 수줌 타바든지 그 보고 톱두고 말에 사제 어두스는 고고레지래 수줌레 셴메세아디.
What is the final line? The cause is none other than ethical conduct. This needs to be understood well, because what it is not saying is that the sole cause for the state of Buddhahood or liberation is ethical conduct. And whilst ethical conduct is the cause for excellent rebirth, it is an insufficient cause to be able to rapidly spiritually progress. There are additional causes required, such as generosity, patience, and others. And these causes are indispensable to ensure that one has an excellent rebirth to aid one's spiritual development, as well as to be able to attain and progress along paths. And for that, one needs also further causes, bodhicitta for those aspiring to the bodhisattva paths, and so forth. So when we see here, the cause is none other than ethical conduct, we should be very clear that doesn't mean ethical conduct alone, but rather ethical conduct is the foundational cause. If one doesn't restrain one's mind ethically, one will not be able to spiritually develop. It is the very foundation of all one's spiritual development. This is the meaning then of the cause is none other than ethical conduct. It is the very foundation. Without it, the other spiritual goals we have cannot be achieved.
다 제 뒤네 송소선 제 뒤네 송세다 변의 사주베도 나라야 되네 망보지기 좀 송여던 망송여바디 다 오마주베 직제지기 dondaji su duishina ningbo duishin songba resi orda. Che duine songso la rawa, che duine songsa de sajube donala ya mangbo songyorde di umajibi ki sikje digi su dondaji su duishina du songba resi.
Just now moving up to what Lama Tsongkhapa wrote, this is summarized in Entering the Middle Way. So the sutra, the 10 Grounds Sutra, it's an expansive text, the meaning of which was summarized into this one verse by the great Pandit Chandakirti.
소저바이나 안디기 디바레 디기테고 마오바나 손께 동아 뇽아 차그레세다 데니게다 룽아 있음이 데니 디바 디소테 네 디기 바 하고 와제 디기테고 마오바나 데네 용고여바데 하고 와제 데네자다 룽아 있음이 디바스 데바 괜제도 와데 데가즈라 강한테 유소디 딜리데는 용고도 와스 데네자다 디 기능에 주기네 지금에 선배게 되네게 룽아 유스미 대원도 따지 룽아 유스미 요거네 아니 안수지기 디벨에서 싸워지는 지금에 선배다 디네 싸워지는 지금에 선배게다 도시네 데 마제와 마제 디네 삼노정 공론점이야 콜주메서 근데 소 마제와 마제게 소 주긴 선배 공론점이야 콜주메 선배게 도시네 셈게 담자지 도시네 담자지야디 and that do some dang race or that in some died, now we don't have to be Sudim Sungore, just that Miki Lelam Judy, Pa Gach and the Dele Pa Semdi, Del Pa Joy, Pa Sungorwa, the Sudim Sungas or the names that in some danger that the Negi Tony Yanch, that Lunga used to be giving Yamlin Gang to do chickens, singing Yamlin chickens and better dushin, some danger. Kulon the chickens if killing dushin assembly at Damcha Shache, the name Sosorangi, that Lunga is Mukin giving him the gang to share what he says. Don't that the soon word that you answer someone to stamach, the Yamlin did dushin Yamlin che what he is. The Yamlin Chebaina, the Yamlin Jeba Latine, Chebaina, the Kevachim on the Kovat, they are delatin top what he is. And then that Yamlin Cheba, the Galaya, that one jig Tarba, Gasa, Nijum Gomia, Sobata, Jamni Jucomia, La Sobatus combine that lamb jig, lamb Gilekiata, the Nifuya going to page, and then Tarbata Temchimo, Tobaji, the Shio, Tambo Zay Kurada, she's a Hortambo, and some Tustin, Tango, says Sumorada, Yamlin Jet.
Meaning then of what we've looked at here is that our body, our physical behavior, our speech, and our mind are the three doorways through which non-virtue is accumulated. And it's through these non-virtuous causes that every single suffering experience results. Every experience of suffering we've ever had has come from non-virtue that we have accumulated through our body, speech, and mind. Not only does it relate to every suffering experience, but in particular, we should understand that it's the very cause by which rebirth in the lower realms follows. So recognizing clearly this process of cause and effect leads to the determination, I will not engage in non-virtue. I will not kill, I will not steal, and so forth. This is the indispensable outcome that we need to come to through this reflection. Because it's this motivation to restrain our physical behavior, our speech, and our mind is ethical restraint. To restrain our body within the or our physical behavior within the confines of what is ethical, to restrain our speech within the confines of what is ethical, and to restrain our mind within those same confines. This is the practice of ethical restraint. And following from this determination will also come, and I must apply myself to virtue as much as I can. I must refrain from non-virtue and accumulate virtue. This is the outcome that we need to come to, and in a way that is transformative. So not just at times when inspiration arises, but at all times, watching our mind, ensuring that what our mind remains within the confines of what is ethical. Our mind is thereby at all times virtuous. And by doing this, at the very least, we will be accumulating causes that will lead to excellent rebirths. And excellent rebirths are indispensable so that we can continue this journey of spiritual development. And when we become sufficiently skilled in this foundational practice, we will then have the mental quality required to develop further causes that will lead to the attainment of Buddhahood, causes such as meditating on love, on compassion, and the wisdom realizing emptiness. And in this way, we will be living a life of great meaning, a life where we are not only causing no harm, but we are accumulating the causes for Buddhahood. But to be able to live such a meaningful life, this foundation of ethically restraining our physical behavior, our speech, and our mind is indispensable.
Then, on those channels, some deity that then is sure that because you may assume you're going to need to some diet that you may assume you give each our count to the chickens and some to get in a shoot, some Danish. The samla Danish court, then Sosorangi, and gang to Yamlen Jet Chagore. And the Gabriel, I think Nangazutina, Jinigi, Lunga Niju Jigme, Sembe, some Locor, some Dominant Gabriel, the Canaba, Jixu Share, loss of Susu Share, Share, the loss of Bata, Gabrielia, the Niki, and the Jun Share, Gabriel, the Wachun Yungurua. You didn't have some Nana Carlos or that this made it to which me somebody in a Lalenta took me to that. Sometimes the church windows and big that some Nalia, the next Jancy Ruada. Dine dance with the dine got Yamlin in some matter Shashagi, Yanga Yungure. Dine Zadi, D. Yungurva and Arazulia, Jinigi, Gabriel in the Yobena, or that dine Yonsa in the Mutisha jigging, Jigmes and Bayane, and yes, some died. They got some chick down by the Karma Chiglia, near Lunga is New Shell and never saw the Chigmea, some Chikova, and this some locovery to Surim Sungo. Di Geva Chadero, and DJ and Gabriel and the King and Teje and Tixura, sure, and Diva Sabaredi, Inam Adit, and ordered in it, Shunso, in a Mombana, the Jelia to Chingmeas, Mayane, and sometime. Those in Yane, Yado, Yane, and sometime when got somebody pa, Gomshi to share agent in it, and do sene, Manzuki, Ma Niju Dom Tuyet pa, Chick. Tajik Dom Ni Dom Dos and then Ma Dom Tuya Denja Dom Tuya the younger mother Dambo Horna some Jik down at some Guinea Gatuya Kalahurwa. Dini Zada, cook legally and cook commission mason, sit on gom said Diro, com said the same cook combrusune, Yajik, the nigger combrusune, legally changed, Ya you try a chagorwa, says Dini Zadus Gabrielia, the next Jumbe, that seems you much have a chance with Mutija that Jewor down.
The way to meditate on ethical restraint is to develop the thought, I will not harm others. I will not harm others through my physical behavior, so therefore I will not take life. I will not steal or not engage in sexual misconduct or not harm through my speech. I will not lie to others. I will not engage in divisive speech and so forth. So one goes through the 10 non-virtues with this determination, I will not harm. And one does so under the influence of not wanting the result that will follow. So in this way, one repeats one's determination not to bring harm. One can then build on that. I will actually rather bring benefit to others. I will bring benefit to protect them, to be kind to them, to show them care. I will not criticize others, but I will not mentally criticize others or criticize them through my speech, but rather when I think of others, I ensure I think of their good qualities, and if I talk of others, I ensure I express their good qualities. So through thinking like this, hopefully it's abundantly clear how the training in ethical restraint is the very foundation, not just of restraining oneself from creating non-virtue, but it's the very foundation for all other good qualities we long to develop. It will not be possible to develop a loving attitude if one's behavior, physical, verbal, or mental, is not ethical, and so forth. So therefore, I hope it's very clear how foundational ethical restraint is. And to think like this, ideally, you do in times like this or at home when it's quiet, and then you can spend some time thinking about this again and again, calling to mind real-life situations. But also throughout your day, you can just take moments. Whomever I'm about to meet, this person has many great qualities. I will ensure that those qualities come to mind, not their faults. And the way that I talk to them, I'll make sure that it is ethical and I refrain from any non-virtue. In this way, we remind ourselves of our motivation throughout the day. And moreover, as beginners, when we reflect on our day, we'll recognize that at times, perhaps I wasn't mindful and I inadvertently took life, or I spoke to or about others in ways that were not kind or not skillful. We recognize then the faults that we performed that day, and we can purify by repeating this meditation. By recognizing in that circumstance, I could have rather responded in this way, and in future I commit to rather responding now in a more skillful way. And in this way, we can use our reflection on ethical restraint to purify misdeeds committed. And if you do this repeatedly over a sustained period, you will develop this habituation. Particularly the habituation one wants to develop will be experienced as even the mere thought of expressing harm physically or verbally will seem repulsive. Thinking badly about others will feel uncomfortable. With that foundation then, it's very easy in all circumstances, no matter how adverse, to feel gentleness towards others, tenderness towards others, and to have the space of mind to apply wisdom. So again, hopefully from this account now of how to meditate on this topic, it is abundantly clear how ethical restraint is the very foundation from which all other good qualities will grow, and therefore it should be the focus of your training.
Jisa di tsujum lunga sinye chu dimbe tsujum sunya de ya jisa da ji koran ji mi ji lam gidi ne zhan xi xin den che song gu le se de ge jun na le ya song do jisa de an ge zhe xi xin den ne zhan ba den zhe zhan xi xin ma den ba na de ne song tu ma le se jisa da lunga ge jue ba de ge nan ba xi man long xue de zhan xi xin de gidi na du xin sam da xie du song gu le ma do ne ji yang zui zhan xi ma dian bai na zhan bian ma xi xin du xi ma xin de ko de ne ge ji lu nga ge nie ba de ge ji jie ge shuo rui nyang a qing bo de za de ge de na zhan xi xin ting go le sa xi.
And this matches so well what we've been covering all here on Wednesday nights in Shantideva's Bodhisattva's way of life. Because the way to practice ethical restraint, both in meditation and in our daily life, is to rely at all times on vigilance and mindfulness. Vigilance is a mind that is aware of one's inner process, so that when one is sitting quietly, it's much easier to be aware of your mind. But through training in that way, when you're engaging with others, when you're going about your daily activities, one, as well-trained practitioner, will be more aware of their mental response to what's going on around them. Their focus will be not so much on what's happening around them, but how their mind is responding. Thereby, they will be able to ensure that the afflictions are not arising, or if they are dispelled. And in this way, their ethics will be unmatched. They will not engage in harmful behavior or harmful speech, because the mind is being kept within the confines of what is ethical. But to do this, it's indispensable to rely at all times on vigilance and mindfulness.
Mena Shindu Medes.
Now we come to the third and final sub-outline within this topic of the principal teaching of the 10 parts of action. And that is that of the topic of giving up hypocrisy. Lama Tsongkhapa writes, that being so, if someone who does not rely on restraining the mind again and again, so as to guard even a single ethical discipline, were to claim, as for me, I am a Mahayanist, that would be a disgrace.
Dene jigan chosuge doshi yane yano samdaji domje doshi masonwache ane dene sungo sosu sungo mares masonwache denu ane di gala gorsen koone tewa chimbo nga tewa chimbo res tewa chimbo shwe nyamle nga tewa chimbo shwe nyamle chiguyose nga tewa chimbo re dasen dene shebe ina tewa chimbo shwe sheba la ane jamnyin che ta 장주 셈 공야 안 추림 저 송고로 되지 주간에 제가 된 류가 예주도 추림 저 송고래 되네 마송아지 추림 되네 지게 마송아지 소수기 밀리아 준시야다 되네 측수제야다 되네기 지금 마송아지 아니 내가 잡아 친구 인사에 도시에 셰베네 신도 매바레스 배 교부레스 디베 노수 첨보레 교부레스 오다 매바세데.
What Lama Tsongkhapa has written here is very clear and very strong. And we should take this to heart. Because what we see in the first part, if someone who does not rely on restraining the mind again and again, so as to guard even a single ethical discipline, this really is referring to someone who's making no effort. They are not even bothering to refrain from killing, let alone any of the others. But ideally, someone should be making effort in all of these, in particular those of body and speech. But if someone is not even trying, but yet makes grandiose claims about themselves, I am a Mahayanist, I aspire to the paths of the Bodhisattva, this is deeply hypocritical. They are presenting themselves before others in a particular way, whereas what they're doing with their mind is pretty much nothing. And from what has been said thus far, it's hopefully abundantly clear that if someone is not ethically restraining themselves, it is not possible to develop a genuine, tender and loving attitude towards others. It's not possible to hold all beings as dear, no matter who they are and no matter how they are behaving. And therefore, if one is not restraining oneself ethically, love and compassion cannot be developed.
강 지시 최 바도 타나 기회 레게 람 지자명 미송라스 원장 시디게도 안에 태바 침보와 때 말라나 메바 양다고 저베 장슈 초로 셰세나 강사디니 신도 출쳬바 주인 침보 마와 상예 점된디 탐지기 쟁얼 안 지딘라 루어를 제바 체버 마와 데스 ane monxindu qiyun du jie jing ane lobar dong'er zhou xie song sos.
Then Lama Tsongkhapa quotes from the Siddhigarbha Sutra. By way of these 10 virtuous paths of action, you will become a Buddha. On the other hand, if one does not guard even a single virtuous path of action throughout his life, nevertheless says, I'm a Mahayanist, I seek unsurpassed, perfect, complete enlightenment, that person is an utter hypocrite and a great liar. He is deceiving the world before the eyes of all the blessed ones and propounding nihilism. At the time of death, he will be very confused and fall in the wrong direction.
gewi se lam jubo nida ge sangye su gyurgi se deji sheba jiba dang zu lunga yusumji nyeje donbe ge da gewi ju lam nyam su lemba dipa zawa di nyam su le dela dene ane ji ngejong gom dene jam ni je changshu sem pashin ju ge nyamren jeba la dene ane sangye ko ban to ko ma do ane lunga yusumji nyeje donbe surim nyamren gewa di nyamren ma jeba ane 예전 자슴 gyula kiechine ane sanyo kopa towa yo marese sungorwada chidan kiwi ju lam didagi sanyi su gyulgi sedo chizani megi jubong tsurum sung di docho kiwi nyamlan jeba di shizache shilache dela dene ane ngechon kom dene kasi jamnye jeda chanshusem gyula kieche dene kyabachime chue nyamlan sanyo kopa toku rese toba gyulgi dene chene nyamlan chene toku rese mato shen toku marese sungorwa.
Look at the first sentence. By way of those 10 virtuous parts of action, you will become a Buddha. This has already been presented, and the meaning is as said earlier. The foundation of one's training is the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and the engaging in the accumulation of the 10 virtues. This is the very foundation of one's training. And if one develops this foundation well, one will achieve the ultimate spiritual goal, full and complete enlightenment, become a Buddha. So if independence on training in the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, one will become a Buddha, then so clearly one will achieve every single spiritual goal one has, excellent rebirths, attainment of bodhicitta, realize emptiness. Every single spiritual goal is attainable as long as one develops this foundation excellently, the foundation of the ethical restraint of abandoning the 10 non-virtues.
아니 지시 수에 봐도 아주 맛이 봐도 다 소소하게 타바탐지 김에 고마 토발라 다 되게 소소 지시 수에 봐도 소소기 맛이 봐도 냠는 제고고 어때 이나 되게 소소기 지시 수에 봐도 냠는 제고고 디 맛이 봐 맛에 아니 타나 미기위리 되지게 님이지라 되게 미기위리 레람찌기 아마죠 야나 직 미기주 차상직 지시 수에 봐도 송고고 이나 디 마송아 맞에 디나는 찌그라 나가 찌그라 마송아제 자야 미송아제 되제 아니 내 원자 소소 송고 마송나야 되게 갈라고서 아가 네 원자 식디게도 네 태바침보 가 태바침보래 제주 태바침보님 가 태바침보에다 태바침이 주님네 지구 가 태바침보 인생 어두스는 송나 지고 말해세네 송거래.
Then, as the text says, on the other hand, so this then refers to someone, as we see here, someone who does not guard even a single virtuous path of action throughout their life. So this is really presenting the starkest possible contrast of someone who really, throughout their life, makes no efforts to restrain themselves. They say what they want, they do what they feel like, regardless of the consequences. So for such a person, they're not creating even a single cause for excellent rebirth. So for such a person then to make grandiose statements about themselves is ridiculous, claiming that they are a Mahayanist, for example.
토비 치르던 냠네 지고래 상가 상요고바 토벌 뒤고래 제사다 nga 태바 침부이 제사 상요고바 토벌 뒤고래 세 딘데기 송나 시나 지고 말해진다 디셰바는 출슈에서 차고래 저 출슈 소수기 냠네 마제발이야 밀리 지기 도도치네 이 지인도도치네 시에드 송거와.
So for such a person who makes grandiose statements about themselves, saying to others, I'm a Mahayanist, I seek unsurpassed, perfectly complete enlightenment, whereas with their mind, as well as their physical and verbal behavior, they really are not making any effort at all. Such a person clearly is an utter hypocrite and a great liar.
데네 제바이나 가사디니 신도 출쉐바산 출쉐바도 즉 데니게 제기나 소수기 마제바질이야 민 류가 넘규르데 샬라야 지규에 도도진 된제고 화다에 디치고도 출쉐바레스 제가 준치모 모와데 준치모 시고레스다디 가서네 소수기 냠네 가 마제바질라가 타바침보 인시도다 다 타바침보 취냠네 산조고원 토바 류규에 대장아 타바침보시도 donda ngai gyula chanju sim je yore jamni je komgo sedi dori ngo so malana donda le di yeto da shigoro wa jeda dine zadi junche bo shigore michule me junru shigore junche bo chanju sim magena je yeto to da dine gi ngai inje magena je yeto to je jigo de junche mo charu gore es junche bo mawas.
And for such a person, so far from what is ethical, they may well make claims about themselves by stating that I am a Mahayanist, implying I have achieved the paths of the Mahayana. I am a Bodhisattva. Whereas, despite presenting themselves in this way, this is not at all how they live their lives, and they haven't developed these qualities within themselves. So this is an extreme form of hypocrisy and telling of a great lie, whereby one claims spiritual realization or spiritual attainment one does not have. So this really is the most extreme version of someone who really makes no effort about themselves, but presents themselves as if they are accomplished practitioners.
상유 줌린디 참 줌린데 탐지기 쟁을 지딘바 안 루어 제바 마와 데스다 상예 점년데 점년데 탐지기 쟁어스 다 제대한 주임 다던다라 가르송어스네 상예 점년데 징아세 상예 점년데 유체담 용어수도 뭐 캠바인자 제자도 소수기 되니게 시엔데 다 상예기 킹거스데 예 제들양어서 체맥에 삼로 당진도 시고래서 제거다 상예 점년데 쟁어 다 킹거데 되니야 체맥 제제 한테 지키 지내는 것도 시에 소소면 맞이나 지구형아 같이 첨부해서 소수기 주인식이요 바데 상예 점년디기 킹기로와 상예 점년의 최담 정원수도 캠바래 다 가서 삼단은 오다딩이 디니신의 상예 킹거를 야고요 말씀 베디시 삼단고로 체외 삼단고 디니 체외 삼마다와지 네 상예 점년디기 안도신 되려야 지금 무슨 킹거를 디쟁가래야 당은 저기 주인신부 대 테메스에 진심부 시고래 해서지 제발 마음에 상유 줌는디 쟁어를 지대를 루어 제바 세대데 가즈를 어디서 고았던 거래 사실.
Making such claims is not only deceptive to the person that it's being expressed to, but the omniscient Buddhas will be very aware of what this person is thinking and saying. So in a sense, they are lying to the Buddhas as well. And this is the meaning of, he is deceiving the world before the eyes of all the blessed ones. Propounding such false claims about oneself is not only deceiving those who hear with it, who are physically in your presence, but also the omniscient Buddhas.
나네 상예 줌네지게 쟁어를 세디 데니시 중국어 제가 상예 줌네디게 쟁어야 아니 냠는 지기인세데 수 담자 케린제 돈바 쉬시네 아니 바나 데니게 소소히 냠나 가야 맞죠 수림라서 가야 마송하지 오당아 상예디네 대주위 내가 이제 도시네 태바침부 주냠네 지구에서 디셔바이나 다디 준침보래 해서죠 니식시한 지된 루어죠 고가다 준침보시고래서지 저거 쟁아서 상예 줌네디 쟁에서 된다 니고에도 쟁에서 상예 줌네디 방고서 상예 줌네디 쟁에야 돈바 쉬 소행이 냠는 지게세베다 데니게 돈바 쉬제 자주셈바 돈바라서 바데 데네 냠는 쉬 데네 쉬는 제ля 지소속에 냠는 마셔바지 미개 주봉을 수림 나지게 마송와지 오당아 태바침에 취 냠는 제에 대한 제 산조고방 토바지 지구에서 셰벤데 준치 보시고 그래서 지금 로아 지구를 해야지 도시네 지도와
In making claims about one's spiritual attainments that one doesn't possess, one is, again, not only lying to those whom one is explicitly saying it to, but the omniscient Buddhas are also aware of your lies. And moreover, especially if one has taken vows, then one is breaking those very vows and telling here what's called a great lie, a lie about one's spiritual attainments. So one is then breaking the promise that one has made in receiving the vows. When one receives vows, one promises to live in accordance with those vows. So here one is also breaking the vows that one has taken by lying in a way that's contrary to those vows. And moreover, whether one has vows or not, but receives teachings, and one may well have made commitments to one's teachers or to the Buddhas. I will train my mind in the way that you are teaching. And clearly, this person telling lies like this has not done so, but yet is claiming to have attained the results of this training they have yet to embark on.
이루지 제가 상예 줌는데 용어순데 킹고르데 디 상예 줌는 용어수 킹고여 바데 상예 체맥에 전에 안에 조수시네 준시고를 해야지다. 안에 상예 줌는데 전에 상예 군들이야 하는 저기 즉 도시는 돈바티 냠네 지기세 켈렌 담자셔바나 안데네 마셔바죠 도시네 준시고를 해야지. 다 도시니가로 쳐서로.
When you see an expression such as this, before the eyes, in this case, of the blessed ones. So before the eyes, this has two meanings. So the one is that through their omniscient consciousness, or if it's not to a Buddha, to a great bodhisattva, through their powerful clairvoyance, they are aware of what one is saying or doing or thinking. So that is one meaning of before the eyes. The other is that in their direct presence, so in their line of sight, you could say, one received vows and promised to follow a certain mode of conduct, and now one is not doing so. So when you see this expression, before the eyes, then understand it has these two meanings, one of either their wisdom eye by means of their omniscience or clairvoyance, or through before their physical eyes, or in their physical presence.
Di mazemba ju kola ya nangme mazemba ju cheme che chen den ba odangi je me se de zun xie chung gu wan odi nan si go sang yi ge ken ba yin ya di dun le ya din de ge ha go ne cheme chen zun xi go se.
This is similar to if, let's say, you do something wrong and someone witnesses this. So a person saw directly what you did wrong. Now, before that same person, to someone else, you say, I did not do it. So you are lying to the person you are telling, that you're telling you didn't do it, and you are doing so in front of someone who saw it, and you know they saw it. So you are so utterly shameless that you will readily lie, I never did such a thing, before someone who saw you do it. So similarly, making these false claims before the Buddha is similar.
Ondini di dushe bene chebar maware cheba mawa se de da bene le kunje meba mawa se de cheba mawa se gusaba le gusaba le de debu digi chya yo mare se da mige wasaba de ne debu dunga chya yo mare se de chebar mawa se de le gule de debu chya yo mare se da dushe ne cheba mawa se siguro da chiro be cheba mawa yewa nga chi yo mare se da de ki debu dunga nyonga da degi yo mare se chebar mawa se chizada duslane chebar mawa da jiba chago re se da chebar mawa se kas le gyunde la yu ne jamni je magomba ane keba chembi sanje goban toya khor yo mare wa se chizan chujum maso ba lunga ni ji de chujum maso wala an jamni je gyule ke janjusem ke nyamne je janjusem gy lam gyule ke yo mare wa se 제우기에요 말로 전주 셈라서바는 냠는 귤에 맞아 봐라 산제 고방 토요 뭐 제우도요 말로 제가 디는자 소수기 류가 이수 예주에 덤비 출전 가야 마서 디는 잠니제 다 전주 셈 가야 마고 맞질이야 아당가 차바 침비 취지기가 산제 고방 토바 지기였다 라바나 제가 뉴메바 질에 제우 여바로 삼단이 거로 제가디 차바마 와다 지과래서 차바마 와서 제가 So in
the sentence, he is deceiving the world before the eyes of all the blessed ones. So that I've explained. And it concludes with, and propounding nihilism. Nihilism then refers to saying that something that in reality does exist, does not. So this is a nihilistic presentation. And in this context, it refers to not accepting karmic cause and effect. So the cause and effect is something that does exist, but the nihilistic attitude towards it would be, there's no such thing. And this is a fairly common view in the world. There are many non-Buddhist presentations that do not assert cause and effect, and in fact say that results do not require specific causes. So how then is this person who's claiming to be a Mahayanist when they are not, when they haven't even really begun to accumulate the causes, how are they propounding nihilism? Because they are, by claiming to be something they are not, they are claiming to have attained a result without the accumulation of the required causes. So they're saying, I'm a Mahayanist, but they cannot point to the causes they have accumulated, such as ethical restraint, because they have not done so. So therefore they are making not just a false statement and telling a great lie, but they are in effect stating that one can become a bodhisattva without ethical restraint and other causes. So therefore they are propounding nihilism.
lokpartawa che cheba ma lokta charu lokpar kiwa chego dinegi lokta keba de hena shindu mong shindu jeza lo mongba ma shiba ro da lokpa ma she mongba lokta ge dinegi kiwong ge ki chido wen shiwa na jiwe du ji jin lokpar tongwa gyuro se de lokpar tongwa se ngandrol ma ki ru re so da dinegi le gyni me ba da kewa nga che mebe ge lokta ki je dinegi mongba 지금 마시고 몸배우 로다기 두치 몸배우 원이 시선바이나 아니 집에나 나서는 난주미 그래서 난주민게 남라서 고와 자고 그래서 아들 로버트 와주어서 마 만들 마기도 그래서 시선소스
Nihilism in relation to cause and effect, or not accepting or rejecting cause and effect, is one of the wrong views, and we'll look at that later on in the text, in this presentation on karma. And because of this wrong view, because of having this wrong view, the quotation continues, at the time of death, he will be very confused. So confused due to having this wrong view, and will fall in the wrong direction. And then we see Lama Tsongkhapa clarify in the line below, falling in the wrong direction should be understood as a synonym for the miserable lower realms. So due to having wrong views and the karmic causes that this leads to, that one then accumulates, this leads to rebirth in the lower realms.
Anda lobartunga said, lobartunga said, lobartunga said, Lagosana, lobartunga ni 탐지도 nganju mingi namran so ko cha was chang lobartunga said nganjo la ko res mi Gabriel nganjo said Gabriel lobartunga said ni ming dusma do da chi pares nganjo gi ming chi res lobartunga said.
So this expression, fall in the wrong direction, is just another way of saying taking rebirth in the lower realms.
Yeah, that then all the lelam ju ko ma di chu savare. That they got some more in the dang ju then le dan ju ten la pa sa that le sa de ne ji so ju be le ma ji me le se lelam ju ma re sin ma de ji ko 가르가르 고고래 대차상 상와라 가르고 레 차상 상와 사발라 튠게 가르가르 상 마사마나 네 튠게 마사 가르마 상네 레사고 마세베 데 레기마 레디 바레레 정원송 마오바나데 사상디니 레디기 제보디니 용거레 세데 마슈야 차고르 자다 데네 레 레다 제봉고송 와세데 레다 제보 땡라 베바세데 데 레디 수 슈야레
That then concludes looking at this first of the two outlines here, the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action. So we saw before that the chapter started with the general characteristics of karma, and now we've started last night to look at the specific categories of karma. And we've looked at that first outline, the principal teaching of the 10 paths of action, and now we come to establishing actions and their effects, which actually starts with those same 10 non-virtues that have been referred to, where one comes to look at them in some detail. And thereafter, one comes to look at their results, their effects, and that then is later followed by virtuous actions. So here one comes now to a detailed presentation on each of the 10 non-virtues. And this knowledge is required so as to serve as the encouragement to abandon them completely.
That in ma and then Initiava de la Danabadilla, now be lady, Garbi lady, Legin, Namia Shandian Bao said, or the such a mason sum sum.
So here we see that this second outline is of establishing actions and their effects of 3 sub-outlines, non-virtuous actions and their effects, virtuous actions and their effects, and other categories of actions.
Nakpo said that Mikiwi lay and the Jebuche, the Carbo said the Kawi Leche, Carbilia Kiwi and the Jebuche, and Lake Nambi Shens and the Maimbetishan Dali, Led and the Namiki Yawati to Timbashi such.
So we have in the first one, non-virtuous actions. So the Tibetan is literally black karma or black actions, but the meaning is non-virtuous. And likewise, the second point, virtuous actions, the Tibetan here is literally a white karma or white actions, but the meaning is virtuous. And so then the third category, which we'll start in our book only on page 137, are other categories of karma.
And Lidi Sheba Telayan, that Tunsan Sum Chekarasene, that Napoli Lelam Weshabas and Napi Leg Lam Numanity, Musoya, Mutiris, Musoya. Then Jiang Cabras, that Miki lay their Gabriel lay and the Shuchewa, Nubacho, did no Shuche, you lay the table because of Nubachua and they were doing Chuan Chagros and Jiang Cabatic, Jik and Nubachung Cabat, the Carrioras Cabasheba. That did I get Tibu Temba, see the Dene, need now be legi Tibu, and Dene de Yunguri said Tibu Mashabates, she said, Sumdua.
So of the first, non-virtuous actions and their effects, that's where we start. So we see there that too is divided into three. So first is the actual non-virtuous paths of action or karmic paths. So this is where there's a detailed presentation on each of the 10 non-virtuous karmic paths. And thereafter comes a presentation on page 130 of the differentiating karma into what is heavy and what is light. And then finally, a presentation on the karmic effects.
Geshe Thubten Rabten sojubi lam ta lam je ngoso ngone de chabala dene ki tungin shi kejem shi gore sojubi shi ane samba jowa tarduk sedi.
The presentation of the actual non-virtuous parts of action starts with the three which are physical, the four which are verbal, and ends with the three which are mental. Each of these 10 are presented in the same way. They have 4 sub-points. And we see here, there's basis, there's attitude, there's performance, and then there is the culmination or completion. So all 10 have these are presented by means of explaining the basis, so to whom the action is directed, the attitude, which has its own subdivisions, the actual performance of the non-virtuous action, and then what brings, and its conclusion or its completion, that is the final of the 4.
Dela Sardad, and Dela Sojugi Shini, Simjin Parabaos. Sojuegi, the she de la Simjin de la Canagos and Simjin, Sojugi, she de Sojuegi, Suedi Carreson, Simjin, Simjin Baje, the Simjin Mazetia, Ranle Shen, Parabachkuris, or Ranle Shembachkuris.
So looking then at the first physical non-virtue, that of killing, here we see the basis. The basis of killing is another sentient being. So here, what is the object or who is killed? It has these 2 components. It needs to be a sentient being, and it needs to be another, so one other than oneself. So those 2 components, one other than oneself and a sentient being.
Jada sojugi shidela ane semjin chingurma dong ji xingro jin de semjin re sam nor ne söne da ba jik jibna da sojugi shidi chago marwa semjin marwa jida semjin dia semjin de paro ba chigu rang le xian ba chigu re la da di go se di jida da so rang ge rang sui ba yorwa jida rang ge rang sui ba de rang di sojugi shi chago wa sojugi shi re ina da de kap de se di sojubi legi lam di tobala ane rangli shenpa sui kores, mato rangi rang sui bai na sochu bi lelam zuguo ma res. Chidan sochu bi lelam pa yonsu zogba la, ane rangli shenpi shenshi sui bachi kukur, rangli shenpa sui egi semchendi rangli shenpa chi kukur, mato rangi sosran sui bai na, sochu bi lelam di chasan zuguo ma res. 다 소주비 레람 용수 조바라 차상 조바들라 아니 가르 키슈는 소주비 시디 가르치 고서 란레 셴비게 셈제 고그래 사실
So the basis for killing, so to whom this physical action is directed, needs to be a sentient being. That means if one kills plants, this is not killing. We may use this word, we may say plants have life, but they are not sentient. We may use the term killing plants, but one is not taking life. So for one to accumulate the non-virtuous karmic path of killing, it has to be directed towards a sentient being. And then the second point, a sentient being other than oneself. So this excludes suicide. And this needs to be understood very clearly, that for one to accumulate the complete non-virtuous karmic path of killing, it needs to be a sentient being other than oneself. Now this does not mean that it is virtuous to commit suicide. It doesn't mean that there are no karmic consequences from killing. And it certainly doesn't mean that the karmic consequence of suicide. And it certainly doesn't mean that the karmic consequences of suicide are slight. Doesn't mean any of these things. But for the full karmic, the karmic path of killing to be accumulated, the definition presented by the Buddha is that it refers to killing a sentient being other than oneself.
Lamrim sojubi shires. Sojubi shire de denigi sojubi shire da shire ina sojubi legi lam yonsu zoba la sojubi shidi rangle shenbachi guguri eswa. Da sojubi legi lam inda mangi shiomada sojubi legi lam di yonsu juba la ane sui rang sui na jigo mare rangle shenbachi sui guguri eswa sui de semjende.
So hope that to get across clearly, suicide, when one takes one's own life, as oneself is a sentient being, one is a basis for the act of killing. But suicide does not lead to the complete karmic path of the non-virtuous act of killing being accumulated, because it doesn't fulfill the definition. But one is still a basis for killing, and it certainly still has consequences.
rangi rang suiba na rang di so chubi shi cha deyorwa, shen suiba na shen di so chubi shi cha yorwa, chizang so chubi shi na la rang da shen niga yungguri es, rang le yungguri shen yungguri es. Na so chubi ki lege lam zoba la di nigi suye ki shi di da rang le shen bachi kukuri es, di kebra pa du shi na sebur charge.
So therefore, both self and other are the basis for killing. In other words, killing can be directed or enacted upon oneself or others. But for the complete non-virtuous karmic path of killing to be accumulated, then it needs to be directed at someone other than oneself.
Kunlong siya nyomo ba siya de jazeli kasi nyom dushi kunlong nyomo se nyomo denigi da sumung gore somebody la.
Then to attitude. So attitude here and for all 10 has three divisions, 3 subpoints: that of discernment or perception, that of affliction, mental affliction, and that of motivation.
지사데 용으로다 베드 두시 군로시다 아니 쇠긴 셈비게 삼로직다 군로와 쇠긴 셈바다 군로치 고거 지사 되네게 쇠바다 당보 쇠긴 셈비 군로치 고거래서 지사다 되네 디나시다 딱 쇠긴 셈도 수수그래서니 디쇠긴 셈 두시야치 고거래 야나 베네 셈젠 디쇠긴 셈 야나 미 디쇠긴 셈 군로치 고거와 군로 디쇠긴 셈 군로치 고거래서 군로 두시에서 디쇠고래 다 되네 녀모라도 야나 코로나지 코로나 쇠바다 야네 차과게 차외 원어 쇠바 디니기 요모지 고걸 제자다 디니기 파주 쇠바들라 다 디니기 소주비기 레기 람용소 조발라 느쇠들이야 아니 군롱다 두시에다 녀모바 숨 참고걸 디숨 마사베이나 파주 쇠베이나야 아니 디 소주비 레람디 주조고 말해서 그러다.
So for the non-virtuous karmic path of killing to be complete, one needs the correct basis as well as these three components of the attitude. So that of discernment means you need to discern the person that one is killing, so that particular person. And in terms of the mental affliction, any of the three poisons, attachment, anger, or ignorance. And in terms of the motivation, there is the wish to kill. So these three are required to fulfill the components of attitude. And basis, attitude, performance, and culmination are all required for one to have the complete karmic path of killing.
그래서 내가 저기 지금 쇠기 군로라 하면은 공부하자 저지도 봐 강변 지지 부 먹고 쇠 연구로 봐대 쇠고를 되지나 부수비 심진 소죄바랑 레신비 심진 부수 소죄바래데 쇠디기 쇠기 군로스 다 삼바디요 말 군로요 말데 군로요 말 두시요 말에 녀모요 말데 삼바디 상요 말아 지산디니에서 만지기 두시네 지게 삼바다 두시 군로 가에 봐시 안지 공부하자지 두시네 부르 쇠바이네 소죄바래베스네 라레신비 심진 소죄바로와 이내다 소주비기 레람 용수 조요 말이에요. 이거 길을 마선 차상 주요 말 상요 말식으로다.
So for example, if one is walking and inadvertently kills an insect, has one killed? Of course. Has one accumulated the complete karmic path of killing? Not at all. And why is that? Well, there was a basis, so there was a sentient being other than oneself that was killed, but the attitude is completely missing. Those three components of a motivation, the wish to kill, that wasn't there. You're walking and inadvertently killed an insect. There wasn't any mental affliction guiding this motivation, and the discernment of that insect is what I want to kill. That too was missing. So all three of these components of the attitude were missing. So therefore, whilst killing has occurred, one hasn't accumulated the non-virtue of the karmic path of killing.
심지어 소주바래데 이내다 나서게 레사고 말 마사와데 가르제래라나 디 튠겐 차요 말레스 두시에다 디네 삼바디요 말어 하시고.
What does it mean then that one has not, despite one having killed an insect, not having accumulated the karmic path of killing, means that one hasn't created the karmic cause that can lead to rebirth in the lower realms. And why hasn't one accumulated the karmic cause that can lead to rebirth in the lower realms? Because the various components, the conditions, are lacking. So killing has occurred. One's body was involved with killing. But the various required components are not there, and therefore the karmic path has not been accumulated.
되네게 안주다 되네게 두시에서다 다 직시도 두시에 파 디스위긴 심비 삼로 셈젠 디스위긴 심비다 가서래 디스위긴 심비 두시에들어 디 파예와 체지 디시 두시 될래 두시들의 시요래제 시 다들래 시 네 디 파니 셈젠디 디 셈젠디 임바 디제 세베다 셈젠디 임바 두시에 직시에 단 심제 마인 버질이야 심제 레샤 셈베 두시에 직지다 지금으로와 베네 심제 마인 버기디 진나고나 딘시에네 지기어다 디페니 심제 레샤 디스오 셈베데 데르데 심제 마인 버질에 심제를 두시에 바제 단 심제 인 버질 어디 심제 레메도 셈베 두시에제 단 데네게 네 심제 인 발라 네 심제 가소레 인바 두시에 바시 자기로 디서 두시에 시용도와 semje dushe tela sen dambo dushe kasore yimbala semje yimbala semje yimbar dushe bachi semje mayimbala semje ne dushe bachi semje yimba chilya semje mayimba dushe bachi tene gare sumro son tene rewa de chigdi gare da 두시네 다 심제 임바 두시바 다 심제 마임바 두시바 사 차기로다 심제 임바 두시바 직제 심제 마임바 두시바 직제 되네 심제 임바라 마임바 심제 마임바 두시 심제 마임바라 심제 임바 두시바 사디 세 두시 시차로 그래 두시 시요레세 지다 두시데 두시기 예와를 마선에 두시 예와 체반데 디시 용거래 제래.
So within attitude we'll look at first, Lama Tsongkhapa presents in detail that of discernment. Just says the translator, the term discernment, the Tibetan is translated in many different ways. Maybe most commonly is that of perception, but it can be differentiation or discrimination. So in different contexts, you'll come across it. Like I think with the mental factors, it's called discrimination most commonly. But other translators here, instead of discernment, will say perception. So it's a very broadly translated word. Anyways, returning to Lama Tsongkhapa. The discernment has 4 possibilities. So discernment, again, means discerning the basis. So one needs to correctly discern the basis for killing, or the basis, the sentient being that is to be killed, or that is killed. So the discernment has 4 possibilities. Discerning the object, discerning a sentient being as being a sentient being, that is 1. Discerning a sentient being as not being a sentient being is 2. It's not being a sentient being is correctly discerned as not being a sentient being, or what is not a sentient being incorrectly discerning it as being a sentient being. So Lama Tsongkhapa writes this: when the basis is a sentient being, the discernment of it as a sentient being, so that would be correct. When the basis is a sentient being, the discernment is of it not being a sentient being, so that it would be incorrect. So for example, if the light's not very good and you see a person, but you don't recognize it as a person. You think it's a log or something like that, a tree stump. So then that is a mistaken discernment. Then thirdly, when the basis is not a sentient being and the discernment of it as not a sentient being. So this is, again, correct. Where something is not a sentient being and you recognize it as not being a sentient being. And then fourthly, when the basis is not a sentient being, but the discernment is of it as being a sentient being. So this is a mistaken discernment, where something isn't a sentient being, but you mistakenly think it is. And again, that could happen perhaps in poor light.
Yeah, that dushe shidi karelan, that in the maloyur, that dushe shidi, she is a she simjan dabola, there dushe bas, the shidi simjan yimba chigla, the simjan re, sambe samata, re, sambadina, that's she simjan dabola, there dushe ba, simjan yimba dushe ba. Simje member and dushe baje simje maimbe chila di simje resha sembege samdamena simje member and dushe baase simje member chile simje yimba dushe baase kasos da dene gi simje member la simje member dushe baase di simje maimbe chilo de simje re mindo sembege samdamena samde dushe badida dushe ba chikche da dene simje la simjen du dushe baje simji le di simjen resha sembe dushe baina ne kaje da simje dushe ba shije da ga je di do simjen da wo der dushe ba se de di da donala simje